What's something creepy that has happened to you that you still occasionally think about to this day? When my friend and I were 17, we used to work in a Pizza Hut together. We were closing up one weekend, so it was about 11 PM by the time we shut down and were ready to lock up. When we walked out to her car, there was an old lady sitting in her front passenger seat. My friend opened the driver door and asked the old lady before getting in, "Can I help you?" The old lady said, "I just need a ride home." So we tell her that we just have to go back inside and call our moms to tell her we'll be late. We go back inside the store and lock the door and call the police. Within 10 minutes the police are there arresting her. Turns out it was actually a 47-year-old man dressed up as an old lady. They found drugs and a knife on his body. When I was around 13/14 I was home alone, upstairs, when I heard somebody busting open the kitchen door yelling, "Fire, fire, get out." I didn't smell anything, nor did I think that there was that could ignite a fire. I had ordered takeout and all the things that could set a fire were off, so I decided not to get out and called 911 explaining everything. The police came and found muddy footprints in the kitchen, along with the kitchen door busted. When I was in the early years of secondary school, probably 12-14ish, my mum asked me to take a bag of sugar over to my elderly neighbor's house as she lent us some sugar the previous weekend. Being a bit bratty, I didn't want to take it as I didn't feel like interacting with anyone, but I took it anyway. Stood at my neighbor's front door, timber frame, frosted glass panel in the middle, and knocked. Saw her walking down the hallway to the door and decided that I really didn't feel like chatting. So rude of me, but anyway. So I put the bag of sugar on the doorstep and legged it back to my house. Obviously didn't say anything to my mum about leaving without talking to the neighbor. 3 days later, my neighbor pops round to our house and asks if we noticed anything strange around her house in the last couple of days. Naturally my mum says, "Oh honeybee went and dropped the sugar to you. I thought you'd have spoken then." So I was caught out and had to explain that I'd rudely dropped the sugar and essentially ding dong ditched. Neighbor goes on to explain that 3 days ago her alarm was triggered and her house was robbed. She had been interstate and forgot to let us know. It wasn't her walking down the hallway to the front door but the people burgling her home. Sometimes your intuition speaks to you in weird ways, but that day I just did not want to talk to anyone, and I still think about how lucky I am that I bailed when I saw that figure walking down the hallway. Who knows what could have happened. When I was maybe 10 I was over at a friend's house hanging out. Her neighbor was out of town and my friend was feeding the cat while they were gone. So my friend and I went over to feed the cat. Immediately upon opening the door, we heard someone walking upstairs. They were loud, heavy, slower footsteps like didn't even sound human. My friend and I just looked at each other and sprinted back to her house. The worst part was we told her mom and the mom didn't believe us and made us go back and finish feeding the cat alone. We were terrified but did it. When the neighbor came back, they found that their house had been broken into. 2 days after I was assaulted by a man. Someone left flowers on my doorstep without a note. If it was him, he knows where I live. When I was little I was sleeping over at my friend's house. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Dark far end of the hallway, away from her room. When I stepped out of the bathroom, her older brother was standing outside the door, in the dark. He never said a word, just walked up to me silently and put his hands around my neck. Someone stirred and he dropped his hands. I immediately called my mom and left without even saying anything. Friend never believed me, and I never went back. My mum used to start at work at like 3 AM and she was up at about 2:30 having her coffee. I heard her up and went to see her. She joked that she heard something outside and me being a bit silly opened the blinds up wide as a joke and there was a guy just standing there staring into the lounge room. That was creepy enough as it is, but what sticks with me is the fact he didn't run or really react for what felt an eternity. While I ran to get my old man and brother, apparently he just stood there and then slowly walked off. When I was a kid, maybe 10 or so, I was home by myself. Pretty normal since I was a latchkey kid. I was just hanging out and shooting a cardboard box with one of those cheap airsoft guns you have to rack every time you shoot. I hear a knock at the door and see a bald man through the peephole. It seemed like he was looking through it and saw me. Being a stupid kid that thought adults could get me in trouble. Do not teach your kids that. I opened the door He said he had a leak in his apartment downstairs and came inside to look for a plant or some reason for a leak I was sketched out, and being a kid I thought maybe I should shoot him with my dinky little plastic Wilder and run. He said something along the lines of how that's weird, turned around to see a little boy with his hand around a pistol grip at his waist. That guy got the hell out of there. Nearly spun out on the hardwood. That was the day I either stopped a weirdo from breaking into my apartment, or the day I made my downstairs neighbor think the weird kid upstairs will shoot him. When I was a child I was playing out in the front yard of my house when a white van pulled up on the road. The sliding door opened and a guy in his early 20s waved at me to go over to him. Luckily I was a shy kid and got scared and ran inside and told my parents about a strange man in a van calling me over. My parents raced outside but the van was gone by then, and it was only as an adult I think back and I realize what a serious situation that was. I could have been abducted that day and worse. My dad told me to rake some leaves in our front yard when I was like 12. I ended up working for a few minutes then felt eyes on me. You know the feeling. I turned around and my neighbor across the street was taking pictures of me, so obviously, right when he saw me he put his phone down and turned around. I immediately ran inside and told my family. None of them believed me. I'm 18 now and he's still my neighbor and I have been creeped out ever since. I have to close my window blinds all the time still because I always feel like he's watching me. In my dorm room I heard the very distinct noise of those slider volume knobs on an iHome. If you know what the term is, help a sister out. As far as I know, this sound is not often or easily replicated by something else. I can't think of anything that makes that sound. I was alone and it happened only once, so I was like and didn't think anything of it until the next day I checked my mail and had received a card from a person who previously went to my childhood church. That's a whole different offshoot of creepy, but I digress. To provide a bit of context, this individual and I had rarely spoken directly. I had no connection aside from attending the same church years ago a while back for maybe 2-3 months. Childhood time is a foreign concept. This person was also a registered sex offender. Now for the punchline. The card read, "Have things gone bump in the night yet?" That's it. That's all it said. I was at an internal work event party at a fancy hotel in a different state. It was 80s themed. I started talking to some dude. I barely knew anyone there, so I was trying to network, and he tells me he doesn't work for my company. Okay, no worries. I make a joke about free food. He stares me straight in the eye and picks up one of my French fries off my plate, dips it in ketchup and eats it without saying a word. I kind of freaked out and dropped the food in the trash and just walked out of the room and decided not to think about it. A few minutes later, there he is, staring at me. I change rooms again. I'm short, so I hid behind people and pretended to talk to people I kind of recognized from my home office. He follows me. Every few minutes I see him. I finally got the courage to approach a woman I knew the name of from some meetings and seeing her around the office. When I asked if the party had any kind of security, she immediately asked if it was about the dude in the blue jacket and white hat. Apparently she'd noticed him staring at me creepily, so I didn't have to try and convince anyone. Security took him away and everyone moved on, but I was scared and paranoid for the rest of the business trip. I had a stalker in college. Had to move dorm rooms and building 4 times in the middle of the night. Friends would help me get to my dorm by pretending we were going to theirs and making sure no one was around when I'd go into mine. He found 2 of the dorms and left notes in my room. It's been over 11 years and I live in a completely different state, but every once in a while I get the feeling I'm being watched and panic. I grew up on a cattle ranch in a once rural town. Our house sat alone in the middle of a 200-acre plot of land, surrounded by a few small neighborhoods and some other small farms. There was a pasture light just outside the yard, visible from the living room. As a kid-teen I had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and randomly walk through the house to check that the windows and doors were closed. It was the 90s in a small town. We didn't always lock our doors. It was just a routine thing I did to help me get back to sleep. My dad is the same way. Anyway, when I was about 14 I was doing my checks in the middle of the night, and I look out the window at the pasture light and there, bathed in blue light, was a lone man, just standing and staring at the house. I froze for a moment, then ducked down below the windowsill, hoping he didn't see me too. I only waited for a few seconds and peeked out again, but he was gone. I told my dad and he just nonchalantly shrugged it off and said that people will walk across our pastures all the time since we were in between two major roadways, mostly homeless or locals without cars. You can bet I started making sure the doors were locked as well after that. When I was in middle school, my girlfriends and I rode the bus home most days. The bus driver was this older guy who was super nice fun and would allow us to play whatever music station we wanted, and he would drop us off at home last so we could dance around on the bus. I remember he would let us stand at the front of the bus while he drove and he would purposely swerve to make us fall on top of him. I remember thinking it was weird, but it wasn't until I got older that I realized how wrong that all was. I decided to Google his name. I'm now in my 30s, and found that he is a convicted sex offender and is currently incarcerated. Scary part was when I think back, he obviously knew where I lived, and I remember there were several times when he'd ride past my house on the days I wouldn't ride with him. Keep in mind driving past my house was out of the way of his normal route, so it was intentional.